Hey, yo, welcome back for another deep dive. So, you're trying to finally crack the code on emergency funds, huh? And not just the generic have some cash for rainy day advice. You want to know exactly how much to put away, right?
Yeah, no, it's a smart question because financial security is really about being prepared, not about hitting some magic number.
Right. And it's funny because our source actually dives into this. They say that nearly two-thirds of Americans would really struggle to cover even an unexpected $400 expense. So having this fund isn't just about, comfort. It's really about resilience at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And that's exactly why, like, a personalized approach, it always trumps, just generic advice. And the classic 3, 6 months of living expenses, sure, it's a good starting point, but honestly, it can be a bit vague.
Yeah, okay, but what counts as a quote living expense these days? And whose lifestyle are we even using as a benchmark here?
Yeah.
Right. That's where the source gets really interesting. They encourage you to think about your essential costs, you know, things like your rent or mortgage payments, utilities, groceries, and transportation. Those are like pretty non-negotiables for most people.
True, but then they layer in this idea that your lifestyle heavily influences how much cushion you might need. Can you give us an example? Paint a picture for us.
Sure. So imagine someone, right, and they're living in a bustling city center. They likely rely heavily on public transport. So they might have, overall lower transportation costs compared to someone who has to commute by car every day and has to factor in gas, insurance, and maintenance. They're both spending on getting around, right?
Yeah.
But the amounts could be drastically different.
That's such a clear example. And suddenly this whole 3 to 6 month rule starts to feel less like a hard and fast rule and more like a flexible guideline that you adjust based on your own life, right?
Exactly. It's about finding your financial comfort zone, not someone else's. And what's fascinating is the source. They actually found that people who felt in control of their finances, and this is regardless of their income, they experience significantly less stress.
So it's not just about the money itself, but the feeling of being prepared. Okay, I'm starting to see why this is such a popular topic. But how do we actually start building this fund? Because let's be real, not everyone has thousands just lying around to, stash away.
Yeah, and the source addresses that head on. They emphasize that consistency trumps intensity, like every time. Even starting small, think like $20 or $50 a month, it's a huge win.
That's a relief to hear. It makes this whole process feel way less daunting. But what about those of us who struggle with consistency?
Well, the source had some pretty compelling advice on that front. They're big proponents of automating your savings.
Okay, tell me more about this automation magic, because if it takes the pressure off of remembering, that's already a win in my book. What's the psychology behind why this works so well?
It's like, we're trying to outsmart our own brains a little bit. When you automate your savings, you're really just making that decision once, right?
Right.
To set up that automatic transfer. And then after that, your system kind of takes over from there. So no more wrestling with your willpower every single paycheck.
Yeah, it's like that saying, right? We don't rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our systems.
Yes, exactly.
And having a system in place really takes the pressure off of having to be perfect
hmm
with our financial decisions every single time.
Exactly. And actually, the source cited a study that found people who automated their savings were 65% more likely to stick to their goals. That's huge. And they also highlighted that you're less likely to spend money you don't actually see hitting your checking account,
Yeah.
which makes sense.
Out of sight, out of mind. But where should we be stashing this cash? I know the source touched on high yield savings accounts, and I have to admit, I always get a little intimidated by anything that sounds, too investment-y when it comes to my emergency fund.
Yeah, I hear you. It's about finding that sweet spot, I think, between security and growth. And the source really emphasized that with emergency funds, accessibility is key. You need that money, available instantly
Right.
without any hoops to jump through if an emergency happens, right?
So we're not chasing stock market returns here. We just want our money to, work a little harder for us than it would in a traditional savings account.
Precisely. And that's where high-yield savings accounts come in. They generally offer, a higher annual percentage yield or APY, I think 4% or higher compared to the often, dismal 0.01% you might find with a traditional savings account.
Okay, so for those of us who need a quick refresher, what exactly is APY? I feel like I hear that term thrown around a lot.
Yeah, so it's essentially the total amount of interest you earn on your savings in a year. But it also factors in compounding. So a higher APY means your money is growing faster, even if it seems like small percentages in the grand scheme of things.
And the best part is, Unlike the stock market, there's no risk of losing your principal with a savings account,
Right.
high yield or otherwise. It's about like maximizing the growth potential of your money while still keeping it safe and sound.
Exactly. And, as we've been talking about all this, it occurs to me that we often focus on like the big, scary what ifs when it comes to emergency funds,
Yeah.
job loss or like major medical expenses. But the source actually made a really interesting point about the smaller, often overlooked emergencies that can also kind of derail our finances if we're not careful.
Oh, tell me more about that because I think
Yeah.
those smaller, like unexpected expenses are often what like throws my budget off track more than anything else. It's like I'm way more likely to have to like dip into my emergency fund because of some random car repair or a plumbing issue than, if I were to suddenly lose my job. Those bigger things, they're scary, but honestly, those smaller things pop up way more often.
Exactly. And you know what? The source actually calls these like gray rhino emergencies.
Right now.
Yeah. It's like they're the ones we can kind of see coming,
Right.
right? But we often ignore them until they're like right on top of us.
Okay, yeah.
They gave the example of an aging appliance. Like at some point, it's going to break down, right?
Right.
Having that emergency fund just kind of takes the sting out of those moments.
Totally. It's like that extra layer of like financial protection so you could just breathe a little easier.
Exactly.
Even when, those inevitable things come up, instead of panicking, you're like, okay, no worries. I got this.
Exactly. And what's interesting is the source actually found that having, even a small emergency fund, even as little as like $500 can like significantly reduce people's financial anxiety.
Oh, wow.
So it's not even just about the actual amount, right? It's that feeling of control, I think.
Yeah, it's like that mental load is lifted and you can, actually focus on other things knowing you're prepared.
Well, as we wrap up our deep dive today, I want to leave you with a question to kind of ponder. We've talked about the how-to of it all, right? Like how much to save, where to put your money, and why starting small is so important. But what would bring you the most peace of mind to have covered? Like what's that one just-in-case expense, even if it falls outside of those like typical living expenses, that you would just feel incredibly secure knowing you could handle?
That's a really good question because it makes the whole idea of an emergency fund more like personal, right?
Yeah.
More tangible. It's not just this abstract financial goal. It's a tool
Yeah.
to empower you to, face the unexpected.
All of that. So until next time, remember, building financial security is a journey. It's not a race. Give yourself permission to start small, automate where you can, and really celebrate every step you take towards feeling more in control of your money. Until next time.